My name is Kevin Olickal. I'm the state representative for the 16th district. So I represent my district is 50% city of Chicago, 50% suburbs. I represent about half of Skokie, all of Lincolnwood, the entire Westridge community. I go all the way to Andersonville. And I argue that I might represent the most diverse district in the state. A majority minority district. I represent the largest South Asian population. I represent the largest Asian American population. I have a large Orthodox Jewish community. I represent a large Muslim American community. I'm half city, half suburbs. A wide variety of populations and ethnic groups and geographic groups as well. So it's been a privilege to represent the district that I grew up in, that has been a haven for immigrants and refugees. And, it's been, again, incredible to be able to represent this community. And we have obviously unique challenges with our diverse populations, but we really rely on partners like SAAPRI and other organizations within our district to help us tap into every corner of our district. As someone who got into public service, my goal was always to protect and advance policies and institutions that allow someone like me, a kid from a working immigrant family, to make it. And that means protecting our essential institutions like our public education system, our healthcare system, making sure that we're protecting every population, whether they're immigrants, whether they've been here for generations. We want to make sure working families and working people have a chance to pursue the American dream, to live with dignity, respect, and opportunity. And so a lot of our we have obviously in Springfield, we focus a lot on our budget, and that budget is, it's a $50 billion budget that allocates funding to things like public safety, public education, healthcare, and that is always a top priority in making sure that our budget reflects our priorities. But then we also are obviously responsible for changing and implementing policy and laws at the state level. And so some of my top priorities personally, as a bills that I introduced, that I worked on heavily in 2025. One of them, one of those top priorities it still continues to be working on an issue related to homelessness. In summer of 2024, the Supreme Court ruled that in Grants Pass v. Johnson, which essentially opened the door for municipalities and cities to pass ordinances that specifically criminalize life-sustaining activities, people experiencing homelessness. So we're now, with that Supreme Court ruling, we've seen municipalities across the country, including our own state, we're up to, I think, about 30 municipalities who have passed ordinances that specifically criminalize and penalize people for trying to survive homelessness. So we've seen ordinances passed where you can charge someone $500 in fines and fees for sleeping in their car for 2 hours in a public space. These are anti-camping bans. So with we know that is not the path that we're going to take to solve this and address this issue. It pits municipalities against each other. And it undermines our statewide efforts to address homelessness. So this bill, House Bill 1429, was a top priority in 2025. It continues to be a top priority for me as we see homelessness steadily increase, seeing cuts from the federal government. We are not going to address this issue by criminalizing people for surviving. So that is a big priority for me. A bill that did pass that I was proud to be a co-sponsor of was the Safe at Home Act, Senate Bill 8. This bill, requires gun owners to safely store firearms in their homes where there are minors or prohibited persons may have access to them. This bill also has a provision that I worked on that specifically addresses lost and stolen firearms, so for this portion of the bill, it would shorten the reporting window for lost or stolen firearms from 72 hours to 48 hours because we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to keep track of lost and stolen firearms and making sure law enforcement has the tools that they need to better track and make sure that those guns don't end up in the hands of bad actors. And that bill did pass this year. And then a bill that I worked on with a coalition of folks was this is sometimes even though we are in a very progressive state, we've done some incredible things. We have some archaic laws on the books. So specifically, we had a law on the books that required people, if they were changing their name, to publicize that in a public newspaper publication for about 3 weeks. So this is specifically harmful for those in the trans community, victims of domestic violence, victims of human trafficking, and so this 25 other states had already repealed this book, repealed this law, and we've repealed this requirement in March because we don't want to create a paper trail for our vulnerable populations, especially in this environment where we have a hostile federal government going after some of our most vulnerable communities. So we work together with a broad coalition of people to remove that requirement. And then another priority of mine, we passed a bill related to solitary confinement in our prison system. Unfortunately, in Illinois, we do not have any provisions or guardrails on the use of solitary confinement in statute. So we were hearing stories of people being put in solitary confinement for a year on end for something like bringing in a cell phone. And so we introduced the Nelson Mandela Act, which would align our regulations and protections around the use of solitary confinement in line with the United Nations adopted a resolution. And so we are still working through that. We want to, we're working with the Department of Corrections and a number of advocacy groups, but we were able to pass a data collection act, which requires the Department of Corrections to open the books on how they're using solitary confinement. And with that data, we're hoping to better work with them to figure out how we can come to a resolution here, because solitary is a form of torture. And we want to make sure that we rein in the use of this in our prison system. I think on specifically legislation, obviously, all those bills touch our communities in one way or another. The Name Change Act specifically helps people, victims of domestic violence, the trans community, people who are victims of domestic violence. We also passed a bill, the Faith by Plate Act, Senate Bill 457. This bill was signed into law in March, making Illinois the first state to mandate the availability of halal and kosher meal options in public schools. So right now we have the framework in place so that we can ensure that every school district, every child in any school district across our state will be able to access a halal or kosher food item. This was a huge accomplishment. One, it was bringing together two communities on a very important issue, and it was a opportunity to show kids that, hey, doesn't matter what your faith is, you deserve to have a healthy, warm meal at your school, and you deserve access to that, regardless of your cultural background. And right now we have the framework in place. We passed a law, but it is subject to appropriation, so we're continuing to work to make sure that bill is properly appropriated so we can actually get these meals out to students in the near future. And then obviously the Safe at Home Act, gun violence is something that touches every community, and especially a piece of that bill, which is the safe storage. We want to make sure that we are keeping kids safe in the home when there's a firearm in the house, and so that's a critically important bill. And I think we also have to talk about, we did pass a balanced budget. We have been seeing, especially because of the national economic downturn, we have seen revenues come down, and we've had to figure out how we're going to close budget gaps. And we refused to do that by putting that burden on working families. We closed corporate loopholes. We made some efficiencies at our state budget to make sure that we are in a position to properly fund our critical services like Medicaid, making sure our social service agencies have everything that they need. And so I think that is also critical for our district. We have, again, a very diverse district, but that also means an economic outcome as well. So we want to make sure that regardless of where you live in the district, regardless of your current economic situation, you have access to the services that you need. That includes critical things like Medicaid, SNAP, and other services that people are reliant on. And oftentimes, when there are budget cuts that need to be made, often those items should not be on the chopping block. And we made sure of that. We were not going to balance a budget on the backs of our most vulnerable. So again, we have to talk about the budget issues. We are going to continue to see We're seeing a very hostile federal government go after our most vulnerable populations. So we're going to see huge cuts to things like Medicaid and SNAP. And we as a state have to decide how we're going to close those gaps. I don't have the answer to that right now, but I know what I don't want to do is we're not going to pull the rug out from our most vulnerable. And so that's going to be a big priority in 2026 is figuring out how we can make sure we have a budget that reflects our values, even though we have a federal government that is very much hostile to working people right now. And so that is going to be a big priority for us. And then on top of that, our legislative priorities, I'm continuing to work on legislation, our legislation to respond to the grants pass ruling, because with the economic downturn, we are seeing an increase in homelessness. We are seeing cuts to critical funding to programs that address homelessness. And we need to make sure that we are not allowing municipalities to pass these ordinances that criminalize people for surviving these conditions. I'm also the chief sponsor for the Rifle Act. This bill establishes essentially what it's trying to do is there is a huge burden onto the public health system because of what happens because of gun violence. There's a huge cost to the healthcare system, to victims, to families, and we want to make sure that the firearm manufacturers are being held accountable for the costs to the system and the damage they cause to our communities. And so it seeks to establish a licensing system that would share the costs associated with firearm injury and death with the firearm manufacturers. And so we're working on this was a grassroots piece of legislation that came to us from a doctor, a trauma surgeon from the University of Chicago, who has seen firsthand the impact of gun violence on our communities, on our healthcare system. And so we're hoping to pass this bill this year to shift that burden, to make sure that firearm manufacturers are being held accountable for what their product is causing in our communities. And then I'm also working on the Warehouse Worker Protection Act. We are currently seeing the proliferation of these big box retailers building warehouses, specifically companies like Amazon. And in these warehouses, we're seeing pretty horrific working conditions, people being forced to meet quotas that they are not being told. And so we're seeing increases in injuries. A lot of our population, a lot of the people that are in these warehouses, many of them are immigrant workers who are afraid to speak up about the working conditions. But we need to make sure that while we are seeing growth in these spaces, it cannot come at the expense of our workers. And so this bill would require it essentially establishes standards for work quota transparency and protections against unsafe working conditions in places like Amazon warehouses and big box retailers. It's important for our constituents to know that their place, their voice is incredibly important. One of my favorite days in Springfield is the Coalition of Asian American Organizations that come down to Springfield on those action days, and you see people from across the spectrum. You see young Asian Americans, you see seniors who are down in Springfield advocating, because at the end of the day, it's their capital, it's their budget. That all of these things are as much yours as anybody else's, and your voice is as important as anyone else's. And so, I don't want people to feel shy about reaching out to us and telling us what issues are important to them, because if there's something that is affecting them, whether it's in the 16th district, whether it's in Skokie and Lincolnwood, that is probably an issue that is affecting someone else in our state. And so it's important for people to speak up, even if they feel like it can't be, in their mind, it may not feel like the most important issue, but it's important to us because we work for you. We work for all of our constituents, and our job is to carry your voice with us to Springfield, and we can't do that if we don't hear from you. And we're always looking for feedback. How can we better reach out to, how can we make sure that every corner of our communities feel like they're being heard? That's something that I'm always working on as someone who represents a very diverse district, and we are always looking for ways to connect with folks because we want to be as accessible as possible to all of you.